really come around to saying, okay, how do we make sure that people have sort of the right incentives and the right environment to actually search out new ideas? That's what's really going to make the difference. And in fact, in teaching my students in our arts administration program at Indiana University, this is one of the things I try to talk to my students about, is, you know, when you become an arts administrator, when you're running an organization, how are you going to think about the generation of new ideas? Because they're not simply going to arrive in a FedEx package. You know, somebody has to think these up, and you want to be able to encourage the people who work for you. That means there have to be sort of rewards in place for people who can come up with innovative new ideas. That's going to be important. There have to be systems of sharing knowledge and information, because everybody working with you has a different knowledge set, a different set of ideas, and you have to find ways to bring those together and foster networks and communication so that things can be brought together and so on. So I think we've changed the way we think about this in these terms. Now, in terms of sort of city planning and thinking about what's going to make cities grow, then you want to think, okay, well, what kind of environment is going to foster firms, whether in the nonprofit sector, in the arts sector, the commercial sector, that are going to pursue these sorts of things? Are there things in the actual environment and the ambiance that are going to encourage the development of new ideas, the development of networks, and so on? Will we get crossover from the arts to the non-arts and design ideas, as, you know, which I think is one of the Richard Florida ideas that he's tried to push. Is there an atmosphere of new things? Is it encouraged? Do people feel they're going to be rewarded? Do they feel people are interested? Can you make a city that has that culture to it? And then you start to attract the ideas people. Okay.
Well, I think that for me, the crux of the situation, though, is we have been maybe in a mode where the notion of beauty, or the notion of being in a place that you would want to be, you know, maybe you could call it cool, has no economic value, perhaps. And that it's not part of the computation, and it's not part of the formula in terms of, and I think the question maybe is that, should that be part of the formula? And what is it that you grab on that you have to develop in a strategy to try to develop like a Portland, or like, you know, something that would become cool, or something that, you know, is it sort of the non-tangibles that we're talking about, well, in terms of how streets look, or how sidewalks, or what a vendor can be there? And it's not a matter of high resources or low resources, it's just a state of being and a way of developing that environment. Kristian?
There's a really good book called Chasing Cool, which I'll save you the trouble of reading it and just tell you the best line in it, which is, if you're chasing cool, you're on the wrong side of cool. Right. So the minute you start trying to be cool, you're not cool anymore, right? So when we talk about strategies, and if we accept my fuzzy logic that at the end of this, it's all about being cool for one demographic versus another demographic. So, you know, if you're too intentional about a kind of a meta strategy, I think you're kind of just, you know, wasting your time, right? I mean, once again, you look at these cities, and my interest is around startups and startup communities. So the cities that I kind of have studied and that I travel to and that I spend time in are not the Tokyos and Parises of the world. So I can't speak to how those cities become what they are. But going back to our Portlands and our Austins, you know, first of all, Seattle, Portland, Austin, these are cities that 30 years ago were not even on the map compared to the way they are today, right? There were things that, there were catalytic events that vaulted these companies, these cities. In the case of the three I just mentioned, they all had to do with dollars and cents, the Benjamins, right? So, you know, in Austin, which was a big college town, right, and the seat of government for Texas, and not much else until the mid-'90s, and this little kid named Michael Dell came along and started building computers in his dorm room, and, right, Austin just kind of exploded. Even if you look at Silicon Valley, and obviously this place held up as, you know, this pinnacle of supercharged economic development, you know, that all started with a little company called Fairchild Semiconductor, right? And innovation begat innovation begat innovation. none of those were designed, right? Seattle, which owes a lot of its current visibility to the music scene that emerged there. When did it emerge, Jeb? 92. Okay, yeah. You know, and smart people kind of piggybacked on that. But a lot of this is serendipitous. I mean, it's like surfing. I mean, you got to go out when the conditions are right, and you're looking for big waves. But you know, you've got to be right on top of the sandbar at the exact right moment when that thing crests, and you got to paddle hard and all that good stuff. So there's a lot of things you can do around kind of designing conditions for success. But listen, don't think Indianapolis is alone in this quest to do this, right? Every Tom, Dick, and Harry in the country is trying to crack the code of how ultimately they attract talent. Because I would kind of argue to your point that really what it's about is talent. So why does being cool matter? Being cool matters because you can be a net importer of talent. And it is talent that drives innovation, period, right? It is not, I would argue, it is not existing infrastructure, it is not government grants, it is not the proliferation of research institutions, it is not the number of patents or provisional patents that are granted per annum. It is how many smart folks live in your city, and how do you get them there? Portland's figured out how to get them there, maybe by accident. If you know much about Portland, the whole thing feels like an accident, right? I mean, they're all a bunch of kind of clam-digging wearing hippies with black turtlenecks and berets, but there's an intentionality behind what's happened there, right? And they saw this swell, and they started to build upon it. But ultimately, it really is about getting smart people here. And going back to your original question, where does beauty play into that? It plays a fairly profound role, although I would show you there are some, Austin has invested heavily in this. Minneapolis has invested heavily in this.
It's a matter of timing, isn't it? Like
when
does it happen, right?
When does it happen?
When does the beauty happen?
But there are cities, I would argue, that have had tons of success that haven't paid a lot of attention to that. So I don't know when the last time any of you were in Palo Alto, right, or San Jose. Right. These are not pretty cities, right? And these are not cities that have made huge investments. They have now begun to make larger investments in culture kind of on the come, but it wasn't one of those if you build it, they will come scenarios. It was smart people first. There's an essayist named Paul Graham who says if you want to build a startup economy, you need two things. If you guys don't know Paul Graham, you should go to paulgraham.com and read this guy. He's brilliant. He says you need rich people and nerds. And he said, rich people are difficult to get. They like big international airports, and they like cultural amenities, and they like scenery, right? And this all makes a lot of sense, right? So you do need opera houses, and you need wonderful museums. Nerds are really easy, though. Nerds just want to be around other nerds, right? So you build a Stanford, and you're in great shape, right? This is why Purdue is in pretty good shape, right, when it comes to, at least on that one element.
A nerd is very different from an artist.
Yeah, absolutely. But increasingly, if you look at kind of what drives economics today, it's collusion between nerds and artists, right? So you need those people together.
Right. Well, I was going to ask Rick about that, the issue of talent. How do you see that?
I would say what you need is rich people, nerds, absolutely, but you need the artist as well. That's a trifecta. That's what you need.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying because, I mean, especially in the IT business, it has been very much a combination of
art. Well, and the rich people follow the artist. I mean, you see this, it's the process of gentrification. The artists move into an inexpensive neighborhood, and who follows the artists? The rich people. So that's definitely part of that infrastructure.
So growing talent, let's talk about growing talent. I'm assuming you're kind of familiar with schools here. What do you think schools are doing in Indianapolis or in Indiana to try to grow artistic talent or talent, period? We have 10 minutes.
Well, I can really only speak about the college level. And my answer would be not enough. Because I think that the arts are just not as supported as they could be. If you just take a look around my university, and I feel kind of bad because I teach there and I do love it. At the same time, though, I feel like I'm always having to try to campaign for more support from the university. The arts majors are not valued as much as the sciences, and I understand that where the grant money comes in, but it's where the arts are where culture begins. And I want to just give an example of I was thinking about what Kristian was saying. I was thinking about restaurants. Restaurants, to me, are the place where a great identity for a town or a city can really begin. And I look at the town in which Purdue is situated, which is West Lafayette. And no offense to West Lafayette, or maybe actually I do mean offense to West Lafayette, but the restaurants there are absolutely abominable. There's literally not a decent restaurant to be found. There's maybe one decent, sort of okay type restaurant, but really no, the restaurants are terrible. And the reason why they're terrible is there is no talent. There are no really good chefs because there's no reason for them to come to town. When they try to open a restaurant, it fails because the audience is not there to appreciate, and they're not given enough from the city to be able to, try to sustain the restaurants. And that's an example of, building talent, is that it doesn't, just come out of nowhere, I don't think. I think it needs to be cultivated and it needs to be supported. And once you get one good restaurant, another good one is going to come along, and another and another. And I think that's how a place like Portland starts to happen. On
the issue of talent, Michael, what do you think in terms of attracting talent or growing talent? The sort of two questions that have been brought out at lunch and we're discussing about right now.
I think one interesting way they're related is that most quite talented, either nerdy or rich people care about education for their children. And so the people who are already established talent are attracted to places that have schools that are going to help develop talent. And so you have sort of a virtuous circle. The thing I notice about the growing of talent and trying to build that and the arts inclusion is that what we have in Indiana and the United States is tremendous inequality in the way this is delivered. I live in Bloomington, which has really great restaurants, unlike other college towns in Indiana. And, but it also has awesome public schools. And so my kids go to public school and they get wonderful art instruction, music instruction, very creative. My children are in elementary school, but as somebody who cares about these things, really, it's fantastic. I've got no complaints at all. It's a really terrific place. It's a great place to raise kids, and it's a great place to raise kids because of that. But that's simply not true across the board. This is a rare thing. And so in terms of developing that talent, when you look at the numbers, and these were some of the numbers in our program about the low proportion of Indiana residents who have at least a bachelor's degree, and the lower levels of high school graduation rates and so on. In terms of building an economy and in terms of building talent, those numbers really matter. And you can have some real stars come in and have startup companies that do really well and lots of coolness and all these kinds of things, but that might just end up in a fairly unequal distribution of wealth because you still have sort of this, sort of mass of people who are feeling, I'm not part of this creative economy. My kids don't go to interesting schools. They don't get this kind of instruction. Generationally, this is going to persist, and we don't have much going on. And so in terms of really developing the economy and really having that creative economy and creative talent, I think you have to think about these things like the K-12 system and the fact that in some places, like the cool places we talk about and like the college places we talk about, like Bloomington's very cool, and it has all these great amenities, including a great K-12 system, other places don't. And I think that's very important in terms of thinking about a creative Indiana and the way this economy is going to develop.
I think it's a system thinking kind of thing in the sense that everything is connected. And so that you have to deal with various aspects. But again, I think there's also a value, as an economist, there's a value element because it seems like every time we have any kind of economic crisis, the first set of programs that get threatened are the creative arts or so on. And I don't know, Bich, what do you think about that as a writer and a novelist with our educational
the
sort of
arts get
funding
cut first?
systems? Would the fund